Hey everybody! Our novel study will be on The Secret World of Og, written by Pierre Berton and illustrated by his wife, Patsy Berton. About this book. Of the 36 books he has produced, Pierre Berton insists this one is his favorite, possibly because its 5 human characters bear a suspicious resemblance to his own children. This is what we would call a Canadian classic, ladies and gentlemen. So, here we go. The Secret World of Og. The Secret World of Og by Pierre Berton, illustrated by Patsy Berton, who was there. I wonder if that's true. Dedicated to all 5, and to Peggy Ann and Perry, who weren't born when it happened. "14 chapters, so this will take us about 5 weeks, or it should take us about 5 weeks. Here's the setting. It's the farm where all these kids live. This family lives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we'll get to learn all these characters' names. Chapter 1. What Pamela Saw on the Playhouse Floor. There were 5 children, counting the pollywog, and their names all began with the letter P. Why that should be, no one was quite sure. But Father said it was done purposely so that it would be easier to divide up the silverware when they all got married. At any rate, that's how it was. The eldest was Penny. Her name was Penny and not Penelope, because Father said he wouldn't have a daughter of his named Penelope. Next there was Pamela, whom most people just called plain Pam. All except Father, who deliberately called her Pamela because he said no self-respecting daughter of his ought to be called Pam. Then there was Patsy, whose full name, which nobody ever used, was Patricia Dorothy, and Peter, who was often called Pete, and finally Paul, who was usually just called Polly, or the Pollywog, and who was just 1 year old. On the day that it happened, and the children always refer to what happened as it, Penny, Pamela, and Patsy were repainting the playhouse. Peter was playing with his toy tractor, and the Pollywog, as usual, was in jail. The playhouse was situated several hundred yards from the house where the children lived and ate and slept. And that is why it was able to happen at all. The children lived in the open countryside, and the playhouse, which looked like a real house, had been built underneath a group of large elm trees. The house had a door that really locked and windows that really opened. There were pink curtains on the windows and bright blue linoleum on the floor. There was a little cot and a treasure chest and a pretend phone and several small cupboards. In the cupboards were tiny boxes, which looked like real boxes with real names of soap and flour and cake mixes and the other things on them. Inside the boxes were small, brightly colored candies. The playhouse belonged to Penny because she was the oldest. She was very serious about it. She had a small broom and a small mop and a small pail and a toy carpet sweeper, and every single day she cleaned that playhouse until it shone. Quite often, Pamela helped her because, by helping, Pamela felt that she owned a piece of the playhouse. There were arguments about this, but it was generally agreed that Pamela owned more of it than Patsy, who helped only occasionally. Patsy was very energetic when she helped, but being younger than the other 2, she was apt to cause trouble. She would slosh her water all over the cot and try to scrub the sheets with the wet mop. On this particular day, when Penny and Pamela were repainting the outside of the playhouse, Patsy, who was helping, painted both windows. This caused a great deal of trouble when it was discovered. Penny, who had been painting vigorously and very neatly, being careful to get the edges right, stepped back to look over the job. "The windows have gone," she said suddenly, and with just a trace of panic. "Windows can't go," said Pamela calmly. Pamela kept on painting, rather slowly, for she did not believe that overwork was very good for people. "But I tell you, they've gone, Pam," Penny shouted. "They've just simply vanished." And she began to run around the playhouse, looking for the windows. "Maybe Patsy painted over them," said Pamela, still painting slowly but steadily. Patsy, who at that moment had just finished painting both her shoes a lovely green, looked up and then stood up and began to back away. As she did so, she stuffed a tube of green paint mix in her pocket. You never know when that sort of thing might come in handy. Penny stopped and turned on her sister. "Patsy, you didn't!" she screamed. Patsy had been about to invent an imaginative story that a goblin had done it when nobody was looking. Then she saw Penny's face and decided not to. "Nobody told me," she said, still backing away. "That's right," said Pamela, who was still painting away, slowly but steadily. "Nobody did tell her." "She should have known!" shouted Penny. She would have liked to smack Patsy a good one, but she wasn't sure it would be worth it. Penny had a scream like a noonday whistle, and Penny could see that she was prepared to use it. Then Mother would come, and everybody would talk at once, and Mother would end up making them all do chores. "If we hurried with the cloth, we could clean all the paint off the windows," said Pamela. "It's still wet." She said this as if it were an interesting news item, but made no effort to get a cloth. Instead, she kept on painting. "Well, hurry then," cried Penny, rushing into the playhouse and getting 2 big cloths and shoving one into Pamela's hands. "Don't just sit there. No, not you, Patsy. You're not allowed to help any more. Go on off and play with the twins. You're not allowed in the playhouse until I say so." "Okay," Patsy said defiantly, digging her hands into the pockets of her blue jeans, where 2 frogs, a toad, and a pet garter snake named Snavely greeted them with instant curiosity. Patsy decided she might use her tube of paint to recolor the frogs green. She had noticed lately that they were getting rather faded. "It was all too jalopy for me anyway," said Patsy to herself, but loudly enough for Penny to hear. "What's she mean by jalopy?" Penny asked Pamela, as they began to wipe the paint clean from the windows. "It's just a word she and the twins invented," said Pamela. "It's part of their secret language. Half the time I can't understand a word they say." Patsy, by this time, was trudging across the field in the bright afternoon sunlight, heading for the home of the terrible twins who lived down the road. The twins were her closest friends and allies, being exactly the same age. Like Patsy, they had angelic faces and blonde heads. Like Patsy, they liked frogs better than people, and snakes better than frogs. The 3 of them had once captured a skunk and put him in a paper shopping bag and taken him home. They said they did this to surprise Mother, and of course, it had surprised her quite a bit. The 2 older girls quickly got the paint off the windows. "I'm tired of painting," Pamela said. "Let's go in the playhouse and read." "We ought to finish first," said Penny. "Oh, Penny, it's too hot. Come on." "Well," said Penny dubiously. She really didn't want to paint any more that day, but she disliked starting something and not finishing it. "Just for an hour," said Penny, and the 2 dropped their brushes and went inside. Pamela lay down on the treasure chest, which was full of dress-up clothes, and plunged into her latest Mad Monster comic book. Penny lay down on the cot and turned to page 32 of Lucy Lawless' Girl Pirate, which was book number 27 in the Lucy Lawless series. Pamela had scarcely started the Mad Monster comic book before she began to giggle and hug herself with glee. As the magazine was clearly labeled comic, Pamela knew that it must be funny. She thought that Mad Monster was the funniest thing she had ever seen, except for Black Bart of Tombstone, the television cowboy. As a matter of fact, Pamela thought most things were funny, even when they weren't supposed to be. When Black Bart mounted his faithful horse Quicksand and shouted to his faithful Indian friend Grunto, Pamela laughed so hard she often rolled right off her chair. "Oh, stop giggling, Pam," said Penny. "I can hardly read when you giggle like that." "I can't help it," Pamela said. "The Mad Monster has just eaten 15 people alive, and now he's gone off to his secret lair on the planet Mars." "I don't see what's so funny about that," Penny said. "It's almost as funny as Black Bart," Pamela said, and turned the page to see how Garth Greatheart would manage to capture the Mad Monster, as he always did at the end of each story. Garth Greatheart had enormous muscles like Popeye and wore an extremely odd blue and red suit with a flowing cape. Pamela began to giggle as soon as she saw his picture. "Garth Greatheart is a boob," said Pamela to herself, and began to giggle all over again. "Pamela," said Penny, standing up and putting her book down, "if you make any more noise, you're going to have to leave the playhouse." "I'll stay quiet," said Pamela amiably, and instead of laughing out loud, she continued to laugh, but quietly to herself. She had practiced this ever since she was a small baby in her crib. In those days, she had thought everything was funny, but so many people poked at her that she stopped laughing out loud. Instead, she put on a solemn expression and laughed inside. "What a solemn, serious little girl," people used to say, looking at Pamela with her big, round, brown eyes and her blank expression. Pamela didn't mind them saying that. She thought it was a huge joke and giggled to herself, but inside. Penny was lost in Lucy Lawless. Her favorite books were those about romance and adventure. The more dramatic, the better. Before she learned to read, she had been fed a steady diet of books about good little children who helped Mummy in the kitchen. They had pretty pictures, but no real story. As Penny often said, she liked a book that had a real story to it. At school, when she was learning to read, the books seemed to have no story at all. They had all been about very dull children who talked in monosyllables saying, "Look, look," and "Oh, oh," over and over again. These children never seemed to get into any trouble. As Penny remarked when she was 6, they never meet giants or ogres or get killed or anything like that. All they do is go to the store with their mummy. Pamela thought the school books were hilarious and had sometimes disturbed the quiet of the schoolroom by laughing out loud in the middle of a reading lesson. But Penny, once she learned to read, had sworn she'd never read another dull book in her life. There were 45 books in the Lucy Lawless series, and Penny had read 27 of them. She kept a small notebook with the titles carefully noted down, and the numbers so that she wouldn't read one twice by mistake. There was Lucy Lawless, Girl Welder, Lucy Lawless, Girl Skin Diver, Lucy Lawless, Girl Card Sharp, Lucy Lawless, Girl Taxidermist, and many others. Lucy Lawless was a sort of modern-day Robin Hood, and although she was sometimes engaged in shady practices, the author made it clear that she stole from the rich only to give to the poor. Penny, however, had a sneaking suspicion that Lucy Lawless kept some of the money for herself. Penny had even written a letter in her large, round hand to the local television station, urging that Lucy Lawless be made into a television series. She had a feeling that it would be even better than I Was a Teenage Private Eye, which was her favorite at the moment. Maybe, she thought, they could even get Alfred Laverne, the 14-year-old singing sensation, to play in it. This combination of the world's greatest author and the world's greatest singer sent a delicious little thrill down Penny's spine. Sometimes, in her daydreams, she saw herself being led onto an enormous stage to meet Lucy Lawless and Alfred Laverne in person. "And here is the little lady who started it all," the master of ceremonies would say. "Without her inspiration, the famous Lucy Lawless series would never have been made possible." And then she would shake hands with Alfred Laverne and ask him to come out and visit the Playhouse, and they would all have tea together. Yes, Pam too, and even Patsy, Penny thought generously. If only Elizabeth Ann could be there to share in the joy of it all, she thought sadly. But Elizabeth Ann was gone, probably forever. She had been Penny's very favorite doll, given to her 3 Christmases before, and she loved her like her own child. She had golden hair that really combed and legs that really walked. Then, 3 weeks before, Penny had left Elizabeth Ann outside the Playhouse by mistake overnight. The next morning, she had rushed out to get her, but Elizabeth Ann was gone. No amount of searching produced her, and Penny had never quite gotten over the loss. As Penny lay lost in Lucy Lawless, Pamela came to the end of her Mad Monster book. With a motion born of habit, she reached almost automatically for another from the stack piled on the floor. As she did so, she happened to look about the Playhouse, and it was then that she saw a strange thing. It was so strange, indeed, that Pamela did not open the new comic book, but just watched in fascination. A tiny little saw, quite the smallest and thinnest and sharpest saw that Pamela had ever seen, was protruding from the floorboards of the Playhouse. It was sawing away diligently, propelled by an unseen hand. It came up right through the linoleum, working its way across the floor. Then it turned in a new direction and sawed away some more. Pamela realized that somebody or something beneath the Playhouse was engaged in sawing out a square of the floor. Pamela watched the sharp little saw in silence. It did not occur to her to mention it to Penny, who was devouring Lucy Lawless. If Pamela told people even half of what she saw, she would be talking all the time, and it was not her nature to talk all the time. Moreover, if she told 1/4 of what she saw, people would not believe her. She knew this because she had tried. For Pamela saw a great deal that others did not see. At school, she would often look up from her books, which she thought dull, and see odd things in the schoolyard. Once, in the middle of her number facts, she had looked up and seen 2 very small fairies with gossamer wings seated on the windowsill. The fairies were gossiping together, Pamela decided. She wished she could understand what they were saying, but they were so small she could not hear. Her teacher asked her a question 3 times, and Pamela did not hear. So interested was she in the little fairies. The teacher walked down the aisle and talked into Pamela's ear, and still Pamela did not hear. The teacher then rapped Pamela across the knuckles with a blackboard eraser, and Pamela slowly turned about and saw her. "I'm sorry," Pamela said. "I was just watching 2 little fairies gossiping." And her eyes were so big and her expression so solemn that the teacher did not actually disbelieve her. She simply told Pamela to attend to her number facts. She had long since learned that you could not push Pamela into anything. The odd thing was that, though she spent half her time in a small private world of her own, Pamela did quite well at her lessons. Once during a social studies examination, she had looked out of the window and seen an old man in the sky looking down at her. The old man had a long, white beard, and his face was inexpressibly sad. He was the saddest man Pamela had ever seen, and she fell to wondering who he was, and why he was sad, and whether, up in the sky, he was allowed to drink chocolate milk, and other things like that. Her teacher glanced up and saw Pamela staring solemnly out of the window while the other children scribbled furiously on their ruled paper. It will teach her a lesson, thought the teacher, and decided not to interrupt. The only thing was that when the papers were marked, Pamela was found to have 80%. Indeed, she did almost as well in her classes as Penny, who studied with a great energy and led her class. Penny always got good marks on her report card. The fact was that she studied so hard her teachers were afraid she would become sick from overwork. Penny is an exceptionally good student, the remarks on her June report card had read, and the remarks on Pamela's report card read, Pamela could be an exceptionally good student if only she would apply herself. That was teacher talk, meaning Pamela looked out the window too much. The strange thing was, however, that both girls had got very similar marks. When she was smaller, Pamela had chattered cheerfully about the things she saw as she looked about her. Now she said less. She used to tell her mother about the elves she had seen eating the high-bush cranberries and of the troll she had observed taking a shower in the bathroom when no one was looking. Nobody took her seriously. So this is why Pamela now said nothing at all as the tiny little saw slowly cut a square in the center of the playhouse floor. Whoever was sawing away was very neat about it, Pamela decided. She wondered if the end of the square, when it was cut, would join up with the beginning of the square. It did, exactly. Pamela waited to see what would happen next. Very slowly, the square piece in the middle of the floor began to lift at one end. Soon, a hand appeared underneath it, and then an arm. The hand was very small and delicate, and the arm very thin. They must belong to somebody awfully strange, Pamela thought, because they were quite green in color. A moment later, a small head appeared. It, too, was quite green, and the eyes were even bigger than Pamela's. Pamela looked straight into the eyes, without changing expression. The eyes blinked, the head vanished, and the square piece of the floor snapped back into place hurriedly. She waited for a moment to see if the little green face would appear again, but nothing happened. Outside, in the distance, she could hear the squeals of Patsy and the twins on the hunt for snakes and toads. Behind the playhouse, several chipping sparrows and a cedar waxwing chattered pleasantly in the trees. The afternoon sun poured in through the playhouse window, leaving a bright, square piece of light almost on the spot where the little saw had done its work. On the cot, opposite, Penny came to Chapter 8 of Lucy Lawless' Girl Pirate. Pamela completed the motion which had been arrested a few moments before. She pulled another comic book from the tattered pile beside her and noticed, with satisfaction, that it was a recent edition of Larry the Ghoul. By the time she reached the first knifing scene, she was laughing uncontrollably to herself. Sometimes, she thought, Larry the Ghoul was almost as funny as Black Bart, the scourge of Tombstone.